Sarah Bedford is the Washington Examiner political and investigative reporter. Good morning, Sarah. Good Friday to you.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
I had Mike Lawler on last hour. He tells me he's got enough Republicans to sign a discharge petition on air. The transcript and audio will be posted at hughhewitt.com. 33-month CR. What are you hearing, Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of frustration among the more moderate Republicans like Mike Lawler with the fact that you have these Freedom Caucus members who don't seem to have a clear end game. And, a lot of personal animus towards McCarthy seems to be driving some of this. But I do think that, there's certainly been progress this week towards bringing this to an end. But I mean, still, it makes McCarthy look weak in some ways to have these Freedom Caucus people sort of undermining spending levels that were negotiated before, threatening a shutdown. And there's nothing that clear that he's really been able to offer them because they don't seem to have a super coherent set of demands.
Well, that's what Mike Lawler said. They don't have any demands. They hate McCarthy. Lawler went out of his way, by the way, to praise Speaker McCarthy for having the patience of Job. But when you've got only 4 votes because of the resignation of Chip Stewart in Utah due to the family emergency, you've got to have everybody but Gates, Rosendale, and Dan Bishop. They're running for higher office. They're looking for clicks and donations. What do you expect to happen? Because I do believe we'll end up with a 3-month CR that doesn't do anything for Republicans. And by the way, do you think former President Trump is going to call up Matt Gaetz and say, Matt, I'm going to win re-election. I don't want a House that's run by Democrats that'll impeach me again?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, what I sort of see happening is, McCarthy can pass things with Democratic votes. That's obviously something that he can do when his margin is so thin, something he might very well end up needing to do. And conservatives have sort of said that's going to poison the well if that's the way that you want to move, whether it's an omnibus, whether it's a CR, if you want to move that forward without even trying to quarter votes. But ultimately, that seems to be the path that McCarthy's going to have to walk because, if these conservatives aren't really giving him any room, something has to get passed eventually, right? And so, they're sort of forcing McCarthy into the hands of Democrats in some ways by not even really giving him an opening, any way, any path forward to win their votes.
The problem, Sarah, is that Gates and Rosendale and Bishop are for sale, but they won't stay bought. They have, according to Lawler, they have moved the goalposts repeatedly, and thus the caucus, except for these 12, and it's sometimes down to 5, and it's usually just those 3, are talking at the microphone, is very frustrated. And McCarthy's doing a wonderful job, but you really can't negotiate with someone who doesn't have any demands.
Right. Well, I mean, sometimes you hear them saying, we want more border security policies, immigration reform. Sometimes you hear them saying, the spending levels that were negotiated a few months ago, those aren't sufficient. We need to revisit those. So, if it was one specific thing, right? If they were asking for, let's just say, a chunk of money to build the border wall, and, McCarthy could either decide to grant that or not, that would be one thing. For McCarthy, this seems about just as much as any sort of spending cuts. This also seems about weakening him as a speaker and these conservatives flexing their muscles within the conference. And so, in that context, the undermining McCarthy is kind of the goal, and they're accomplishing it.
Well, let me ask you that. I didn't know this until Ben Domenech told me. Matt Gaetz is going to run for governor of Florida. Brian Donalds is going to wipe the floor with him over this thing. Matt Rosendale's running for Senate in Montana. He's not going to beat the SEAL who's up there. Dan Bishop wants to be Attorney General of North Carolina. I think he's blowing up his chances there. Have you done any work on whether those 3 are raising money for those campaigns yet? Because this is counterproductive for each of them.
I haven't, but it's certainly, if that is their goal, they're accomplishing it, right? They're in the headlines. They're being perceived as sort of leading a so far successful charge to obstruct and upend the appropriations process. So if that is their goal, I think they're certainly accomplishing it. And by the way, a lot of those Republicans are also in really safe red districts. Like Matt Gaetz is never at risk of losing re-election, right? The way Mike Lawler very well could be next year. So a lot of these Republicans have different calculations when they're going into these negotiations. But I'm
But
sure that it's
Gaetz
frustrating.
Gaetz can't be beaten in his district. Gates cannot be beaten in Florida, but if he runs for governor, he's against Brian Donalds, who's working with McCarthy. I do believe that the caucus split reflects the split in the Republican Party. And that would be about 97% behind Speaker McCarthy and 3% behind Gates, Rosendale, and Bishop. I really do believe the caucus actually represents the party, not these three outliers. But the media loves to talk about these three outliers and not the caucus.
Right. I mean, to the extent that this spending negotiation has been held up, I think the media likes to portray this as, a result of Republican dysfunction. And that's true in the House, but obviously, Democrats aren't really willing to negotiate over the spending levels either. And Democrats control most of the government. So, there's a lot at play there. But certainly, those few Republicans are holding up the entire process. And that's got to be frustrating for members that are potentially going to struggle.
Sarah C. Bedford on X, formerly known as Twitter. Great to talk to you as always on a Friday. Sarah, thank you for coming back.